y'all for coming tonight. I'm going to start off by introducing the Bylaws Committee. I am the chair. Monica Burden is a member. Jane Sersky is actually the advisor to the bylaws. She was the bylaws chair last triennium. Celeste Hilliard, Michelle Marini, Lynn Kimbrell, and Nancy Severance as ex officio. I'm going to go ahead and start with the prayer for our bylaws. Let us pray. Holy God, we come before you to ask direction as we view and discern the bylaws of the order. Grant us, in our doubt and uncertainty, the grace to ask what you would have us do, that the spirit of wisdom will lead and direct us to discern your will and save us from false choices. Help us to be open to the views of others and unite us in love as we work together for the betterment of the order. In Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. And I'll turn it back over to Monica. And I want to say thank you, Monica. I've been on vacation, so Monica has put this presentation together for us tonight. So thank you very much.
No problem. That is fine. And I just want to say hi to Nancy Severin, our national president, who's here. If you want to say hi.
Hi, everyone. Glad you're here. And I hope that you will just come away with from this evening, having some more understanding about what's happening and all for the good of the order.
Thank you. All right, so tonight I'm hoping that a lot of you are delegates, and if you're not a delegate, that's fine. If you're a member, you're still in the right place. The purpose of this meeting is really to prepare the delegates and members as well to talk to their delegates. So preparing the delegates to debate and vote on these proposed changes to the bylaws. So in this meeting, we'll talk about what's happened and what's happening in the future, how you can go and make a motion, and we'll quickly review the bylaws and the proposed changes just so that you guys have them in your heads, but I'm hoping that you all are pretty familiar with them by this point. And then we will kind of have a Q&A about this so that you all have everything you need to be delegates at Triennial. Is that okay with everybody? All right. All right. So here's the process so far. And the process is that change requests come into the Bylaws Committee, or perhaps the Bylaws Committee comes up with them themselves, such as me. I came up with a lot of the bylaws changes and presented them to the Bylaws Committee. The Bylaws Committee then takes a look at them, tweaks them as needs be, and presents a certain set of them to the National Council for review. The National Council looks at them all and approves to set them forth to National Convention. They make their own edits to them and then send them forth to National Convention. They are published so that everybody has presumably every member can get a published copy of it. So that was in the winter edition of your Royal Cross. And then we expect delegates to familiarize themselves with the changes and make plans on how they are going to vote or how they might make motions to amend those changes during the business meeting. Okay, so that's where we are right now. We're in that process that's highlighted there. So at this point, there is no changing the bylaws the bylaws changes as they have been presented. Any changes that are going to come will happen in the business meeting. Okay. So what happens next is at the business meeting, so there's lots of discussion and things happening right now. At the business meeting, the bylaws will be presented and discussed. The conforming changes, and we'll talk about what that means. So they will not, in fact, be presented in the order that they were published in the Royal Cross. In your business booklet, they will be presented in the order that they will be presented. And that's because our parliamentarian said you really should present them in a different order. So that's why that happened. So the conforming changes will be presented first, and those are really just the terminology changes. And then all of the other changes will be presented in what is called seriatim order, which is article by article. So Article 1 first, changes to Article 2, et cetera, et cetera. So it's in order by articles, okay? During the debate, delegates are allowed one speech of no more than 2 minutes to address any point of debate. And there is a 10-minute limit on any given question. Now that limit could be amended, a motion could be made to extend that limit. But that is the parameters that we're working in. So part of the reason for having a meeting like this is so that delegates can plan ahead for what changes they might want to make motions for, and think about how to state those clearly and concisely so that we don't all want to be in business meetings for the whole weekend, right? We want to get out of the business meetings quickly. So, but we also want to make sure that everybody has a chance to be heard for what they need to be heard. So we're just trying to help you be prepared for that discussion. Delegates making motions will need to fill out a convention motion form and bring it up to the microphone with them. So that is not a big deal. This is the motion form. It's really quite straightforward. So you would write in the motion relates to, and you would write in whatever the article number is that's being discussed. You would write what you are moving, whatever that is, and you're going to put your name on it. It will be a carbon sheet that has 4 layers to it, so that the right people will get all of those layers. Okay, so that's how we're going to track the motions. Okay, voting. So each bylaw will be voted, each proposed change will be voted on electronically. So I'm not sure that we have done electronic voting on bylaws in the past, but I can't remember. So each one will be voted on electronically. The change must be approved by a 2/3 majority vote. And the changes do not take effect immediately. They will take effect September 1st. Okay, so is that clear to everybody? That gives us, among other things, that gives us time to change all the literature so that it's all consistent. It prevents, anyways, it makes it just easier for us to manage. So they don't take effect immediately, but they will take effect September 1st. So just to be clear, even though it looks like there's a lot of things that are changing, I want to be clear that there are a lot of things that are not changing. Okay. And this is based on some of the questions that we've got about these changes. We're kind of talking about the feedback that we have gotten and the questions we have gotten. So first of all, the order is a self-governing entity. So we are not an entity underneath the Episcopal Church. So we are a separate entity, okay? And that needs to be clear, and we always have been, actually, which is part of why we have bylaws, because these are our bylaws, right? So we're in charge of the bylaws. We are in charge of how the order is governed, okay? So I just want to make that clear. Eligibility for membership in the order does not change in any way, shape, or form. So it is still, the eligibility is still women communicants of the Episcopal Church, or of other churches in communion with it, or of churches in the historic episcopate, but not in communion with it. So there's no change there at all. Currently, our membership consists of predominantly Episcopal members. 93% are Episcopalian. The other 7% are composed of Anglican, Roman Catholic, and Lutheran ELCA chapters, okay? To be clear, that is not all of the denominations that are eligible to have daughters chapters under the current membership rules, okay? That's just who we happen to actually have, okay? And I also want to be clear that the order really does value our close relationships with our clergy, including bishops, and we seek spiritual guidance from them at all levels, okay? And so we want to keep that as part of our culture and convention. However, that relationship is not deeply encoded in our bylaws, okay? So just keep that in mind as we move forward. Okay. The conforming amendments are these 3 amendments that have terminology changes, okay? And so what a conforming amendment means is we're not voting on each individual article where these words are going to change. We're going to vote once to change it throughout the bylaws, okay? These are the changes that have been proposed. I presume you're all familiar with those. It's important to note, I love you all. We got lots of emails about the fact that in the way the bylaws are presented, it still says diocesan assembly and provincial assembly elsewhere in the document, when we've just said we're going to make changes to those words. That is the way it is supposed to be, right? Because those changes don't go into effect until September 1st. That's reason number 1. And reason number 2 is because it's really complicated to make those changes, because those changes haven't been voted on. So we don't even know if that change is going to happen. So yes, everything currently still says diocesan assembly and provincial assembly wherever those appear. Okay, and they will throughout as we present these at the business meeting. The articles will still say that. Just know that whatever happens with those votes, if those votes those are voted through, then we know to change everything in all of the other articles at the time that that is supposed to happen. Okay, so there's that. As I've said before, eligibility for membership does not change in any way, shape, or form. And all of our changes, we recommended these for clarity, for conciseness, and for consistency. Okay, that's why those were changed. We've had some comments of we're trying to desacramentalize, or we're trying to be too political, we're trying to make it sound like a corporate system. Really, none of that was in play. It was really for clarity, conciseness, and consistency across the order. Okay, and if you have more questions about that, let me know. Actually, let's go ahead and see if you all have any commentary on these conforming amendments. Do you have any questions about them? Is there anything more specifically? Is there anything more you need to know to decide either how to vote or how to make a motion to amend these proposed changes?
No, I think we know how to vote.
I would like to know how council arrived at the wording district and region. There are, I understand the why the wording wanted to change. It's how were those specific words chosen? Some of our sister denominations use the term like synod, which might help us getting around the assembly issue. So again, that's my question. How did you arrive at those particular words?
We honestly, I would say we just batted around a bunch of words and couldn't find anything that we really loved, and that's where we landed. It's pretty much how it came out. It was, mainly, again, we were trying to avoid the assembly problem, right? So one option, we talked about that quite at length. So one option was to call what is currently called a diocesan assembly, to call it an assembly. And we opted not to do that because people also call their meetings assemblies, which means you then are having an assembly. Okay. Yeah. So, I have no stake in those words at all. I don't know that any of us love them. But they do get us past the problem of diocesan assembly and provincial. So they get us past the problem of us going back to using the words diocese and province, which is we sort of habitually do, which are then confusing because diocese isn't clear what diocese means because there are multiple dioceses that are overlapping. And province, is, if we're going to change diocese, we probably should change province too. That was our main line of thinking. District and region just seemed like reasonable options.
Potentially that could be a motion that would be proposed, would be to,
Correct.
instead of
Yes.
using
Absolutely.
region,
That's
use
correct.
synod or.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Though,
Right.
yes, absolutely.
And Sarah Day has her hand up.
Yes.
Hi, I'm concerned about voting for all the changes in one single vote.
Well, it's three
Because if
separate
there,
votes.
may I just, what I understood you to say was that we were going to vote on all the changes in one vote for all the terms.
No, these are three separate votes.
Okay, so if I have a problem with one word, like priest to clergy, which I don't personally, but if just using that for an example, if I have a problem with that, I can vote against that and still support the others as freestanding votes. So we're
Yes.
really talking about a total of 4 word changes.
4 word changes in 3 votes. So the second one, so that number 7 there is one vote to change both of those things together.
Is there something involved with how many angels are on the head of this pen?
Good question. It's a think of it as, we're doing a search and replace on the bylaws. That's basically all it is. Celeste.
I have no question. except for people who want to make motions, how do you get the form?
It will be available at the business meeting somewhere, I
Okay.
presume.
It-
That's,
I believe it's going to be passed out at the business meeting.
Okay, thank you very much.
Nadine, you have a question?
Well, yes, I guess on the last slide that you had, it said that there were changes were recommended for clarity, conciseness, and consistency. Can you help me to understand what that means? Because I don't see an inconsistency now. Or
in which term are you?
it's the last point on there. Changes were recommended for clarity, conciseness, and consistency.
Right.
What are we not clear or concise or consistent about now?
So, okay, so priest to clergy, because we do have Lutherans who are part of our organizations, they don't have priests. So changing that to clergy makes some sense. Also, in addition to, sometimes the clergy in charge in the Episcopal Church is actually a deacon. So it would allow us to have a deacon do the things that we call a priest in charge, that we ask a priest in charge to do, right? Because that is the reality of the Episcopal Church, right? So there's some conciseness, clarity, consistency there. The diocesan assembly and provincial assembly. So the reason we went from diocese and province to diocesan assembly and provincial assembly to start with was because we have Anglican and Roman Catholics whose dioceses are different than our diocese. Okay, so they don't mesh. So the geographic region is not the same. So if you have chapters in those regions that are talking about diocese, it's not clear which diocese you're talking about. Do you mean the Anglican one or do you mean the Episcopal one, right? And so diocesan assembly, provincial assembly, to some extent solved that problem, except for the fact that in colloquial speech, we don't use diocesan assembly and provincial assembly. We revert to using diocese and province, okay? So that's not probably not the best thing for us to do. So
well,
that's
yeah, I just, I'm struggling with that because, you mentioned early on, the percentage of other denominations is 7%.
That's true.
So what are we trying to gain from this? I mean, what's the net gain from all the change? Is there some growth opportunity of our organization that we're drastically missing because of some wording here?
Well,
I'm not understanding.
there isn't necessarily, but there are, so we did just see the Methodist Church vote to be in full communion with the Episcopal Church. The Episcopal Church will not vote to be in full communion with the Methodist Church until 2027. But at that point, potentially, if that vote goes through, potentially Methodists would be eligible to be members, to be daughters and to form daughters chapters, right? They are not in a diocese. They have a different, we've already talked about Lutherans have a synod, right? So
yeah,
I
understand.
Part of it is just to make clear that we are partly in our heads, we still think of ourselves as aligned with the Episcopal geography, okay? And so because all the rest of the bylaws, a lot of the rest of the bylaws are about making it so that we actually can determine our own geography, right?
Yeah, I understand that, Monica, but strategically, what are we going for? Are we trying to say that our strategy for the future is to go out to and solicit these other denominations, and that's what our growth
I don't hear
is
that as a strategy. I just hear that as a potentiality.
Yeah, because then
there's no strategy here. Really, what we're trying to deal with here is the current problem, right? The current confusion that we have. That's what we're trying to deal with. Yeah. Can we go to Nancy?
Hi, this is Nancy. Okay, I just want to say changing words like priest and clergy help them to lose their uniqueness and their significance in our religion. and using them as a one-of-a-kind title. I think other churches, Methodists, whoever, should come to us and not us to them. And I just think these simpler words are disrespectful to our order's long history and tradition, and they have deep significance to many of us.
Thank you for that input. I don't think any of us think that they don't have significance, but I think, keep in mind that it is your job as delegates to decide whether you're going to vote for, against these changes, or make a motion to amend them.
I know my whole chapter is very much against it.
Then you know what your vote's going to be. Great. Grace.
Hi, I have a couple of things. I think one of the ways that the Daughters has migrated into the Lutheran Church and into the Catholic Church and some other places, Anglican churches certainly, daughters who have, for one reason or another, left the Episcopal Church, sometimes because of marriage, sometimes because they've moved, and the church that they wanted was not available, sometimes because of marriage, and they want to go to the same church together, whatever that is. But I think my feeling has always been, let's not tell a woman who has made lifelong vows to be a daughter of the King that she can't be a daughter of the King when she goes to a church that is very similar. I mean, the Methodists came out of the Episcopal Church. Methodists right now, we can't start Daughters of the King chapters there, but certainly the Lutherans have a lot in common with us, and the Roman Catholics have a lot in common with us, and the Anglicans have a lot in common with us. So to tell, a woman who, for whatever reason, is moving to one of those denominations that she has to stop being a daughter seems to me very unfair. And often the chapters that have started in Lutheran churches and Anglican churches and Catholic churches have started because an Episcopalian transferred her membership to that church and said, I have this wonderful thing to tell you about. It's the Daughters of the King. Would you like to be a daughter of the King? Let's ask our priest. I mean, I think that option ought to be there, even, yes, it's going to be a minority. I know that. Or it has been up to this point anyway. Mm-hmm. But I do believe the option ought to be there. And I've got another comment later, but that's enough for right now.
All right. Thank you, Grace. I am just looking at the chat, and I see that Nancy brought up, did you consider the financial cost of the changes, about changing all of our printed books and everything, and also the question about the banners. So I do want to address that. Let me start with the banners. The discussion in the National Council has been that the banners, everything that is created right now stays just the way it is. So if it says diocese, that's fine. If it says diocesan assembly, that's fine. It's just going to stay the way it is. The expectation would be that any new banners that get created would get created with the current terminology. Okay. And as for the printed materials, so the handbook gets redone after every triennial anyways. So the handbook gets phased out and the new handbook would have the new information in it. All the rest of the printed materials get turned over as they get turned over, essentially. Like, it's not like everything would change at once. It's just that when we go to do a new print run of the pamphlets, we would change the terminology before we do a new run of the pamphlets. And usually there's a bigger editing process there. It happens there. It's not just the terms, but so it's not a huge financial hit is the short answer there. Susan, did you have more to say?
I did. So I just had another thought on using our district and region. We are a multi-denominational, international, religious order, and it just kind of rubs me the wrong way to be using such corporate business terms. I know that's not the intent. It rubs me the wrong way.
Again, we are proposing these changes. We welcome motions to amend them and discussion during the business meeting about them. We get that it feels hard to change these things, but this is a discussion for the whole order to have, which is why we put this all forward to National Convention to have this discussion. Sarah, and then Grace.
I'm sorry, take me back through where the desire to change this, where was the first seed? Where did all these changes start? What triggered this all beginning? Did you guys over lunch one day say, hey, I think people would be happier if we called them districts?
No. I would say where this all started was really it starts with the changes that we haven't even gotten to yet, right? It starts with all the geographical changes. Okay, so that's where it starts. And I started looking at that. And when I started looking at that and started thinking about the fact that, well, part of the problem here is that we continue to be tied to Episcopal geography. And part of the problem that I have up here in Province 1, and many of the other provincial presidents will say the same, part of the problem I have in Province 1 is that, for instance, I have one chapter in Rhode Island, I have one chapter in Connecticut, and I have one chapter in Massachusetts. And that's 3 separate dioceses, Episcopal dioceses. I don't have any Anglican chapters. That's 3 separate Episcopal dioceses that are within 200 miles of each other. And I cannot put them in an assembly because they are in dioceses. They are bound to the diocese, right? So the geographic proposal changes is really about, in order for me to put those together, I have to stop thinking of those as separate dioceses, okay? Separate diocesan assemblies. So once you stop thinking, see, even I revert to using diocese instead of diocesan assembly, right? So once you start thinking about that and thinking, well, but I want to be able to put all those chapters together so that they can have their own assembly meeting and they can all meet together, right? And they can have, their representation and governance in that way, instead of having no representation and governance as a diocesan assembly, okay? Then I started thinking about, well, is diocesan, so I don't want to call them dioceses, I want to call it something else, right? So what do we call that? Diocesan assembly, we can stay with diocesan assembly, that is fine. We can change it to something new. That is also fine.
So is that a long answer to tell me that it started with you and your problems in Province 1?
No, Monica, let me answer on some of that. And chapters and daughters on the single level don't get the conflict that's out with some of the daughters because of the different religions and what we're trying, or different denominations. One of the things that we're proposing is to make the order more denominational friendly, because what has happened is we have Episcopal dioceses and Anglican dioceses that actually should come together as one unit, not as 2 separate dioceses. So if we take out that diocese where it's like, it's not you against me, it's us together worshiping and being daughters of the King. One of the things that we've looked at is we're trying to change the stereotype of what is happening in some of the chapters across the US with the different denominations, because it's like we have an Anglican diocese and we have an Episcopal diocese. So how do we come together? Well, it's not Episcopal and Roman Catholic or Lutheran. It's a Christian, daughters of the King. We are trying to be spiritual daughters and followers of Christ and showing love and fellowship and not conflict. And so that's one of the reasons to take that nomenclature out of there to help more with fluency. I don't know if that helped explain or not.
I'm going to go. Nadine had her hand up first, I think. Or am I wrong about that? I don't know. Let's go back to Nadine.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I understand, there are unique situations around the country. And you just described what you're dealing with, Monica, but rather than just make a sweeping change, why couldn't we come up with some sort of a solution to that and give it a separate name? Something like, okay, maybe with your 3 different groups there, you could call it a sacred sector rather than changing, all of the
Okay.
language across the country. I don't,
Okay, I
just
hear what you're saying.
yeah, and another thing is, if we drop priest and just say clergy, and there's no definition of what we mean by that, I don't know what other denominations may claim clergy is. There may be some different rules. And I don't think we want to get into a situation where we have lay people who are considered clergy.
Clergy is clearly defined in all denominations as ordained clergy. So there is an ordination process that all clergy goes through.
But again, if we just said priest/clergy, there's clarity there without having to make a change like that. So,
Pat?
Hi, I'm from the Diocese of Central Florida. I joined the Episcopal Order of the Daughters of the King, and in the original Constitution of the Daughters, it says Protestant Episcopal Church. That's what we were established under.
Mhm.
And as such, I understand the terminology that goes along with my church.
Mhm.
However, we are certainly inclusive of any churches that are in agreement with the episcopate, as well as in agreement with the Episcopal Church. But at this point, we have a 7% membership that is not familiar with the Episcopal terms. Meanwhile, you have 93% that should well be familiar with the Episcopal terms. Why would you want to submit to the cost and involvement of changing the titles, simply the titles, not the particular areas or districts that we're talking about, to accommodate the 7% instead of leaving it as unconfusing for the 93%?
Thank you.
Grace has her hand.
I think we need to remember that we have about 7,000 international daughters, most of whom are not Episcopal. The church in Brazil calls itself both Episcopal and Anglican. Now, they understand diocesan clergy just as well as we do. They're Anglican. But sometimes we think that we tend to think that we're just the US, and that's not true. A very large percentage of our membership is international at this point. And we didn't always, in our bylaws, say that we were the Episcopal Daughters of the King. Margaret Franklin wrote a letter to the chaplain at the very beginning in the 1890s saying that she wanted to be sure that we included our Anglican daughters because we had a chapter in Canada, and she didn't want to say Episcopal Church. And in fact, that was struck. It was left after the first convention, it was left as just the church, and it remained the church rather than the Episcopal Church up through 1940. And then Episcopal was added at that point because we didn't seem to have any international chapters. And it was dropped again, I think in the 1980s, because once again, we did have international chapters. So that has affected the way we see ourselves, not simply as Episcopal, but a global church, a global order with Anglican and Episcopal daughters.
Thank you, Grace. And I would say it is important to consider the international daughters as well. And honestly, that would be a reason to vote against, certainly against the Diocesan Assembly and provincial assembly language changes. That would be a reason to potentially vote against them, because our Anglican, they are mostly Anglican, and the Anglicans would understand that language in a way that, same way that Episcopalian members would understand that language. Just FYI. Celeste.
I just wanted to say something, being a cradle Episcopalian, I understand what many of you are talking about. But by sitting on National Council the past year or 3 years, I have learned more about our order that I could not have learned if I had remained just real parochial. One of the things that Monica described in Maine, it starts taking effect starting in Wisconsin and moving toward California. It is amazing to me. I had no idea. I grew up in Texas, which has very many dioceses. I had no idea that Province 6, their dioceses are Montana, South Dakota, North, they are states. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that I grew up in a very populated area and had nothing to do with the West. Monica speaks about Maine. We need to give some sort of liberty to situations like that. And it's not just a tiny little region like District 1. It is by far a great many of us. Now, admittedly, there are more sheep in some of these states than there are human beings, but there still are daughters who are yearning to be together. And they are yearning, my friends. Diocese 6 is working diligently to get their chapters together, and they're going to have to cross the Episcopal diocesan borders. And so when I was asked, or I read the thing, did y'all have more on your plate than to do stuff like this? It was not done. It was not done with, oh, well, we don't have anything else to do. It truly was to serve the order.
Okay, we need to move on. So I just want to be clear that we have other things to discuss, and I've got things coming in the chat that I know people want to discuss some of the other articles. So I hope you all have heard some of the arguments for and against these changes, and you understand how to write a motion in order to make whatever amendments you would make to those proposed changes. And so let's move on. Okay. For this part, I did just put these in a list because, and this is the order that they will be presented in, okay, which is article by article. I'm not going to go into them in great detail because I am hopeful that you know what they are and understand what they are, or can look them up in your Royal Cross pretty quickly. The first change, Article 3.3a, is one that consolidates the membership language for the church and non-church chapters. Okay, so I do have people talking about what is a non-church related institution. Okay, so non-church related institutions are referred to in our bylaws currently with a parenthetical, which is part of the change here that's happening, is we're partly taking that language out, with a parenthetical that says, e.g. nursing homes, prisons, etc. Okay. So those are the kinds of things that people were thinking about as non-church related institutions. Another option would be chapters in a seminary, which I get is religious, but is not a church, okay? I myself was a member of a chapter in a seminary. That's where I became a daughter. So, those, as far as I know, we looked, and I don't know that there are actually any prison or nursing home chapters, but those are potentials, okay? Those are already allowed for in our bylaws, okay? So the difference between, so for reasons that I presume are sort of historical and had to do with how bylaws got amended, the requirements for admission into a church-related institution and a non-church-related institution are put in two separate categories, even though it's actually all the same. Like what you have to do is all the same. The only difference is that the non-church related institutions makes reference to a chaplain or a bishop giving approval for the member. And that is because in a non-church related institution, you don't have a priest who would do the membership. Okay. So this is our wording to consolidate those and make that all coherent so that it's clear that the requirements for admission are the same for all daughters, whether they're in a church related or a non-church related institution. Okay. Are there any questions about that anymore?
No.
Okay. I also see from Fran, we got, please clarify, a delegate has 2 minutes to speak and discussion is limited to 10 minutes. Only 5 delegates can speak. True, except delegates could only take 15 seconds to speak, in which case we could get a lot more through. Also, remember that the 10 minutes can be extended by motion, okay? Which is what would likely happen. All right. What else? If somebody else is going to have to read the chat for me and pull out important ones. I'm going to carry on with the articles here. Okay. So 3.3a2, 4.1c, 4.1e, and 4.3b are all around this same concern of removing bishops in their references to in the bylaws. Okay. Now I want to be really clear here. There is no intent to not have relationships with bishops. That is not what is happening here. Okay. What is happening here is that the only place that bishops are referred to in our bylaws happens to be in approving chapters that are not in church institutions. Okay. The chapters that are not in churches. Okay. So that's the only place that we invoke bishops at all, okay? And the theory behind that is you have a group of women who want to form a chapter, but they aren't members of the same church, so they want to form a chapter outside a church. So what you do is you ask the next level clergy person to form that chapter, which is the bishop, okay? That's fine when it's clear, when you don't have overlapping dioceses, okay? Potential diocesan assemblies, where suddenly it's not clear which bishop we're referring to. Now, some people would say it's actually quite clear because if it's an Anglican chapter, then it's Anglican bishops. And if it's an Episcopal chapter, it's the Episcopal bishop. But what if you have Anglicans and Episcopalians who want to form a chapter together? Whose bishop are you referring to, right? So that's the reason for taking the term bishop out. There's no intent for it not to be a bishop. So a chaplain to a diocese or a province could well still be a bishop. There's nothing in our bylaws that says what a chaplain is, which is a whole different problem and not one that's being addressed here. There's nothing in our bylaws that specifies who is eligible to be a chaplain, okay? So we can still have bishops doing the exact same thing that we have bishops doing now. We're just taking that specific language out in order to make it clear. Is that clear to people what's happening there?
Monica, I was just going to address some of the questions.
Yeah, great.
Have non-applicable chapters requested these changes? And that would be no. It was Episcopalians that requested the change. Prisoners or nursing home residents would be DALs, and that would be a no, because if there are, it's the same requirement as a chapter. You have to have 3 daughters. So you could have 3 prisoners as long as they're follow our definition of who a daughter can be, that they have to be of the Episcopal Church in communion or in the historical episcopate. So they would actually be a chapter in that entity if they were approved by whatever we decide as who has to give the approval for that. So, and Nadine had asked, have bishops or priests or chaplains been asked for their viewpoint on these changes? We did discuss some of this with our national chaplain, and she did give us some insight. So I would say, yes, we have discussed. So go ahead and go on, or if there's any other questions.
Okay. Susan's got her hand up.
Thank you. So my question has to do, how do you foresee the spirit, how or whom do you foresee the spiritual authority for these chapters that are in non-church, that are non-church related? You know,
That is, so in the bylaw, it specifies a chaplain for that chapter. It specifies that there should be a chaplain appointed to that chapter.
so in that case, it's meant like, so in a chapter within the church, we encourage chaplains, but we don't have to have them. But that would be different. So that is going to be different than for the non-church related chapter.
Correct.
Okay.
Because presumably a chapter in a church has at minimal the clergy in charge at the church.
Right.
Correct. I'm looking at my notes here, and I do want to point out the change to 4.1e. That change, which is where we take out the reference to bishop's chapter, it's in a parenthetical. If you look at it, it's in a parenthetical that says diocesan assembly bishop's chapter. Okay, so where we remove that word, changing that, the way that is changed would allow for instance, a province-wide virtual chapter, which is not salient in most provinces. In province 1, where we have 160 daughters total, 43 of whom are DALs, it makes sense to create a province-wide virtual chapter that would enable them to be a member of a chapter, and that the language there would make that possible. I'm not saying we would do that, but that it would make that possible. Yeah. Okay.
And I think Province 8 wanted that also, because there's such large geographic regions of what are now diocese or province that they would help them to reorganize that.
Right. And that's partly a shift in our thinking, like, when Daughters was formed, there was creating a virtual chapter made no sense. You needed to be local to the church, right? And now we have this possibility. I don't think it would ever be the canonical way to go. It's just a way that could happen. I also had somebody who said, but I really want to call my bishop's chapter a bishop's chapter. And if what you want to name your chapter is Bishop's Chapter, go ahead and name it Bishop's Chapter. I have no problem with that at all. I just, we don't want to default to using Bishop's Chapter if we're not using that in the bylaws elsewhere. Grace. You're muted.
I have been transcribing the handwritten minutes from 1907 to 1919. And that was before the province system was decided on by the Episcopal Church. Halfway through those minutes, I find Daughters discussing the provincial system, which had not yet been voted into the Episcopal Church. And what they are talking about among, when they refer to chapters organizing, they talk about the local assembly, or they talk about, sometimes they go by the city. So it's the Chicago Assembly, or the Philadelphia Assembly. So there's using assembly before the provincial system is there. And then they adopted the provincial system after the Episcopal Church adopted it. My preference would be to hold on to assembly and say the local assembly, or the regional assembly. And the regional assembly has an annual meeting rather than an annual assembly. Or the local assembly has an annual meeting rather than an annual assembly.
So are we back in the wording change? So instead of diocesan assembly, you would say local assembly, and instead of provincial assembly, you would say regional assembly? Is that what you're suggesting?
That's what I'm suggesting.
There's a motion that somebody could make.
Yeah. Get you a motion for me, Grace.
Okay.
Also, I would also recommend talking about whatever you want that wording to be. Talk to everybody about it, and figure out.
We're not
the best
set on
words.
the names.
You will figure out the best words. Figure out the best words and propose them. That's why we have a national convention. Okay. All right. All right. Is there anything else about this part of it? Susan, sorry, Sarah, I can't even read anymore. It's getting late.
The removal of the word bishop, I understood I listened to your explanation about crossbreeding of Anglican and Episcopal women into a single chapter and searching for that. But I'm hesitant to endorse removing the references to bishops, since my understanding of one of the requirements for a chapter to participate or for somebody to a church to form a chapter is that they support the concept and holiness of the episcopate throughout. And so and episcopates, as far as I know, all include bishops. So why would we, the churches that are in a fellowship with us, must support, as I understand it, and are eligible to become to have members, support our traditional, the tradition of the bishops and episcopates. So why would we remove bishops? Because that seems to me to be a phrase and a name that is common across all of the eligible religions.
Because it's not clear which bishop we are referring to.
But I understand.
And to say it doesn't matter which bishop is not satisfactory is the short answer. Like, it's not satisfactory.
I understand in your world, where you were, where you are, that may be more of a problem and more of a difficulty. But I'm just concerned that we have one girl that can't wear anything but high heel shoes, so we're going to make everybody wear high heel shoes. That's my concern. I understand the benevolence of the intent. I just have a challenge in my heart about removing, about desanctifying our language.
And I hear that, and my response to that is the one that I have already given, which is that in fact that is not in evidence anywhere in our bylaws except for the one place where we require bishops for non-church institutions. That's it. That's the only place that we mention bishops. Okay. So I just want to be clear. It's really not changing very much to begin with. And so that's all I have to say about that.
So the list of 5 things isn't 5 things?
It is. It's 4 different places. 4 different places, all of which refer to non-church related institutions. It's where those show up. Okay. Or chapters that are not being formed in churches. That's where it shows up. Okay.
I appreciate your efforts to talk to me.
Okay. I am happy to talk to you. I appreciate the confusion and anxiety. And look, this is, for me, this was months and months and months of work. And when I initially started doing it, I was like, I didn't want to remove bishop either. Right. Like, but that's how this works. And then I looked at it and I was like, for all this is all, the name changes, all of this is all in the context of these larger changes, which we're just about to talk about, which is the geographical ones. Those are the ones that are really important to me personally, and to the daughters in my province. The others were really outgrowths of my understanding of how that could happen. Okay. All right, so moving on to the changes to Article 4. Article 4, 4A, Article 4, 4B, Article 4, 4C, Article 4, 4E, and Article 4, 4H, which may not have those numbers when we get done, but that's how they are right now. So this is the redefinition of what a diocese and a province, a diocesan assembly and provincial assembly are, and how chapters can get put together in a diocesan assembly to relate to one another. Okay. I think I've already told you the story that's happening up here in Province 1. I am not the only one that has these issues. There are other provinces that have a number of unassembled dioceses with chapters that are reasonably close together that would like to get together and form a single diocesan assembly, for instance. So the easiest way I could think of to do that is to make it really clear that our diocesan assemblies are geographic and that we get to decide what those geographies are. Okay. And to be really clear, the National Council is absolutely, like, nobody wants to go around creating a new map, right? That's tedious and exhausting and takes a lot of time. So we are using the Episcopal Diocese as they stand now as the basis for this, and anything else that's going to happen is a change off of that. So I've already talked about, for instance, if we take Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts and turn it into a single diocesan assembly, right? We're no longer in the map, but we're still close to it, right? Because we just have kind of meshed 3 of them together, okay? So we have to do that at both the diocesan assembly level and at the provincial assembly level in order for this to make sense and work. The other issues that we've had are things where there's a chapter that is in an unassembled diocese, but is really close to an assembled diocese that is, for instance, not, and so they're like, well, we don't need to form 3 other, can we just move into that diocesan assembly, right? So we just want to be able to move them to the people that they're geographically close to so that they can have assembly meetings with those daughters and not be all on their own, okay? It really is all about forging connections between all of these groups. I think I've gone through all of those things.
Monica, there's from the chat,
Yes.
Margie Doyle says, all these denominations have bishops. Wait a minute, it just moved. Okay. All these denominations have bishops. The Roman Catholic, the ACNA, Anglican bishops are not in accordance with the Episcopal Church, but each denomination has its own bishop who do not hold ecclesiastic authority. Some ACNA and Roman Catholic bishops may have issues with Episcopalians and ELCA.
Also true. Thank you. Okay, Susan.
So I want to make sure I have it clear in my mind.
Mhm.
We are going to continue as we are.
Mhm.
The council does not anticipate making any unilateral changes in our geographical boundaries.
Correct.
They will be addressed on a case-by-case basis as the chapters, in the case of diocesan assemblies, chapters bring their issue to you.
Correct. To the National
So this
Council.
would kind of be, and so from one national council to the next, there would not be a review process. It would just be, again, we'll review it when someone comes and asks.
Correct.
We have an issue that, well, we have potentially 2 or 3 dioceses within the Episcopal Church who are looking at unifying.
Correct.
If they don't, then their chapters may still want to. And that's why I wanted to make sure, I wanted to clarify our process. Thank you.
That is correct. Yes. So the process is that there would be a petition that goes to National Council, a request that goes to National Council to consider that consolidation, and then that consolidation would be approved or not by National Council. I do want to point out that this also works on the flip side, which is that there are Episcopal dioceses that are looking at that are planning to merge, and if the orders, diocesan assemblies don't want to merge, they could petition to not merge in that way, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it allows us to have control over our own boundaries.
Before I mute, I thought of one more, when you were talking about the virtual province assemblies, and I'm sorry, that had skipped by me on the first reading. Will there also be an opportunity to use the current terminology, virtual diocesan assemblies, chapters?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I was going to say, nobody anticipates doing this, but once we are clear that what we're talking about when we talk about a diocesan assembly or a provincial assembly is a geographic area and not one that is tied to a specific denomination. Another thing that that we have control over what those geographic areas look like. Another thing we can think about doing is distributing our distributing them differently. Now, I don't think anybody wants to do this anytime soon. Like I said, it feels really hard, but the fact that 50% of our members are in province 4 currently, and province 1 which has 11,000 daughters roughly, and province 1 has 160 daughters, and we have equal representation on council is an interesting, it's an interesting governance concern. Okay. That's way larger than I ever want to get into. So that's like, you know, many generations down can deal with that problem. But it, you know, it is something that I was thinking about when I think, you know, when it occurred to me that probably making it clear that we have control over our geographic boundaries is important. Okay.
All right. Monica, I'll read a couple more of these questions that are in the chat.
Great.
Let's see. There's several long ones in here. This one is the Episcopal Church is in full communion with ELCA. The ELCA recognizes one organization for women of the ELCA. My understanding, the Roman Catholic daughters are required to follow their own ecclesiastic authority. Who will be our ecclesiastic authority? What is the definition of a spiritual leader? Under chaplain duties, we as daughters are told, as a daughter, we have promised to pray daily for your clergy. You should seek their guidance and support their ministry within the parish. History in 2006 triennial, everyone who wanted to speak on the issue were ruled out of order. Many were not allowed to have their say, let alone discuss the issue. It was also discussed at triennial 2009. So that's one of the comments. The other one just says, I appreciate the discussion and work that has been done so far. I'm curious whether you considered leaving in our traditional terminology for the 93% who are Episcopalian and adding equivalent for the 7% non-Episcopalians. And then last one right here says, we must all pray fervently for discernment with regards to these changes.
Amen.
Sometimes necessary for clarity. Change may not be the best, but may occur so gradually that our values, traditions, and sacredness are eroded without us even realizing. Sort of the case of how to cook a frog. Anyway, that's some of the comments out there.
Thank you.
And we
Judy.
will be looking at all of these after the call and addressing them in the forum.
Thank you, Judy.
Back to you, Monica.
Nadine's got her hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to say, you know, I'm the president of the Diocese of Central Florida, and we have over 1,000 members. So we're on the other end of the spectrum. I appreciate all the work that has been done, and I know that, you know, you have really great intentions in this. But from the description of having control over the geography and being able to slice things down, that I think is problematic. So, I mean, because you could say, well, that diocese is so large, we want to shrink it and, you know, cleave off these churches and cities and create a smaller group. You know what, this sort of opens the door for that to happen.
Right. So again, it would be National Council that would make any decision like that, petitioned by whoever it is that wants to make those decisions. So that would be left up to National Council to do that if that was requested. The reality is that this is actually already how we work. This is really making clear that what we are talking about are geographic entities and not denomination specific religious entities, if that makes sense. Like when we talk about a diocesan assembly, we aren't talking about, so the Diocesan Assembly of Massachusetts, we're not really talking about the Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts. We're talking about the order's diocesan assembly that exists in Massachusetts. Okay, so it's really not changing anything that is actually happening on the ground right now. It is recognizing that that is in fact how we operate and making it clear in our bylaws. Does that make sense?
Well, I understand what you're saying. And in our situation, the geography of the diocese for Central Florida includes 85 churches and cities that are in the Central Florida area, and that's what our diocese, our Daughters of the King diocese, mirrors that same area.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly what we're saying but we're saying it mirrors that area. It is not identical to that area. So if around the edges, for some reason, if the order has some reason to shift those boundaries slightly, we can do that if we need to.
And
Celeste.
well, and Nadine, as Monica has said, this to shave things would only be at your request. You might say this is getting out of hand. We would like to be more intimate. And so you as the president would put in for a bringing realigning. Thank you, Judy. It would not be done like, okay, we're going to tell you how to do. At least that's not our purpose. It is at request at both ends.
Okay.
And this, all of this comes out of a lot of conversation that the provincial presidents have had over, the 6 years that I've been a province president. And I've been a daughter since 2007, which isn't as long as many of you, I know, but is long enough to know that we don't take things lightly. So we would not make changes to these geographic boundaries lightly and easily. They, any such changes would be taken seriously. And with great prayerful consideration.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to move on to the last slide, which is, okay, I'm actually going to go back because, hang on. I'm going to go back because I want to talk about these number ones, which kind of get wedged in here. Dues relief, that's really just clarity, no big deal there. This one, this administrative 44H, this administrative clarity one. Okay, so this is the one that says, that is in addition, it's a new bylaw that says chapters, diocesan assemblies, and provincial assemblies should not apply for their own 501c3 status. And that is it's just for clarification. 501c3 status is a very specific thing. It requires and because those are all sub-entities of the order, which has its own 501c3 status, they do not and should not get their own tax exempt status because it muddies our tax exempt status. Okay, that is not the same thing as an EIN number, which is the IRS number that you need in order to get a bank account. That is one that any of those entities that want a bank account should get an EIN, should and must get an EIN number. So those are not the same thing. So just questions about that. We are not talking about EIN numbers. We are talking about a 501c3. Okay. The last ones, there's a date change. So the last really big ones, there's some sequencing. There's so the two, one is the changes in eligibility to stand for national president, and the other is the change to potentially allow, if national council chooses to do so, allow essentially remote voting, allow people to vote at national convention without being present. That again. Remember, these will not take effect until September 1st. So the first year that would be in a play would be 2027, and it would only be in play if National Council decides to put it in play. It would resolve issues like we had in whenever the pandemic was, 2021. When we could not meet and we could not have a convention, and our bylaws say we have to meet in person in order to have a convention. So it would alleviate that problem in the future. Okay. Celeste and then Karen.
If you would give the numbers of those daughters that are at home, that was very impressive to me at our last National Council site visit. The people that were not voting for, do you remember those numbers? Like 75% of us were at home or something, maybe.
I don't know. I have no idea.
You can't remember? Okay, I can't either. But it was a very large amount of people
I do know that, as it gets more and more expensive to go to triennial, fewer and fewer people are able to go to triennial. So, the options for doing remote voting changes who potentially is eligible to vote and what chapters get representation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Karen.
Okay, thank you. One of them has to do with voting options. And also, my concern, the things we are talking about are major changes to the entire order, and concerns me that all chapters in good standing will not have a vote in this, because only the people who are healthy, wealthy, and have the time to attend triennial will have a vote in this. So I am wondering, should this be something that we take a deep breath? And as you've said, Monica, it's not something that needs to happen September 1st at 12:01, but do we need to be making sure that we have at our diocesan, district, regional, provincial, whatever, events, that we have folks on a listening tour, and actually, if it's assisting folks to move their brain on, I also don't understand why 7% is wagging the tail of 93, but that's new math. I'm an old dog. So I guess that is one of my concerns. And then also, and maybe again, I'm confused and don't know how to read, but I didn't see or didn't get the feeling that we would be asking National Council if we wanted some of these changes. I got the feeling that come September 1st, there was going to be, okay, we're going to cut you up. You're in this region, you're in this district. And then we were going to get told who our sales manager is. And I didn't see that it was by request.
We did put that it's not in the bylaws, it is in the notes next to the bylaws. So it's in the rationale column.
But if it's not in the bylaws, do you know what I'm saying?
It does. So you are correct that the specific process by which that would happen is not in the bylaws. It can be problematic to put it in the bylaws. The bylaws do say that National Council is the one that decides what those geographic areas are. And
how often do you see that you would redraw them?
Very rarely. I don't. When we talked about it in National Council, nobody foresaw doing this at all with any frequency at all. There are specific problems that we have right now that we would like to resolve, and this is a way for us to resolve them. We can foresee that there may be similar problems in the future, that it is an ongoing concern, and this allows us to take care of those.
I guess, like in your situation, Monica, I would just make 3 phone calls. If they're all chapters in Episcopal diocese, I would call each one of the bishops or send them a group email and say, how do you feel? These 3 groups would like to assemble. Thank you very much.
So we can't do that because our bylaws don't allow us to do that. Hence, we are changing the bylaws so that we can do that. That is exactly what's happening. Thank you for clarifying. That is the whole point of making these changes.
That's not how I'm reading it.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I'm really confused about. And I get, as Celeste can tell you, I get confused very easily. The other day, I was talking to someone about the bylaws. They were reading out of the Royal Cross. I was reading off the website, and the two versions were not the same.
Okay, so I want to clarify that. What the changes are the same. What is different is the order in which they are being presented. Okay, so in the Royal Cross, we publish them according to thematic area. Okay, so we listed those changes. It said change number 1, change number 2, change number 3. That was sort of according to ideas. Okay, we subsequent to us publishing that, our parliamentarian came in and said, in order to run the meeting, you really need to present these. You need to present these 3 conforming changes first, and then you need to present everything else in order by article number. So we have rearranged them to be in that order.
But which one, if you're going by the Royal Cross, if you're going by,
I would go by the one on the website now is going to be clearer. And what will be published in the business book will be the one that's on the website. If you want to refer to what the actual change is, you can look in the Royal Cross, just use the article number to find the one that you want to refer to.
Okay, but I guess my point is there can be confusion when there isn't agreement.
Yes, we regret that. That's what happened. We did not
I've
parliamentary until after we had to publish everything. So we published it as best we could, and then we're told by the parliamentarian that we should have published it a different way. But we had to publish it when we had to publish it. So
I appreciate your indulgence.
Thank you, Karen. Kester, and then Pat.
Okay, my concern is that there is nothing in the bylaw changes for any of the daughters at large to have any vote or voice.
Daughters at large, so diocesan assembly, daughter at large, chair has a vote. That is what is currently in the bylaws. Yes, we're not changing anything about that in this.
Okay, so, but what about at the assembly level? Do any daughters at large have any vote at all?
That would be up to the assembly bylaws.
Oh, okay, so we have that option to do that.
Sure.
Okay.
The local assembly is, the local assembly, we're already using the local assembly. The diocesan assembly and the provincial assemblies have their own bylaws that govern who gets a vote at those assembly meetings. Our bylaws we aren't changing any of those bylaws, so those are what the bylaws are right now. And if, just to be clear, if you want some changes that you're not seeing here, there's a whole nother triennium coming up where you can propose changes to the bylaws and send them to the bylaws committee and go through this whole process for 2027.
Yay, thanks, Monica.
This is how it's done. This is how you change things in the order.
Love you lots.
Love you too. Pat.
Just a quick clarification. Are the proposals as they stand now until the National Council makes some changes that the district would remain the same as the diocese in geographical area as it stands now? We're just going to change the name from diocese to district.
If that vote passes, yes. If that vote passes without being amended in any other way, yes, that's what would happen.
And the region is going to be what's now known as a province.
Provincial assembly.
The same geographical.
Remember, we're talking about diocesan assemblies and provincial assemblies. So diocesan assembly just gets renamed district. Provincial assembly just gets renamed region.
Right. And then one little kind of housekeeping chore. Instead of using remote, for instance, in the last sentence there, to vote remotely, I think your terminology would be better if you said electronically.
That is how it's listed in the actual, I was doing this quickly, and that's the term I used, but it's termed differently in the actual
Should be
bylaws.
termed electronically because that implies remote.
Well,
Thank
except
you.
that electronic, because we're voting electronically, but we're voting electronically in person. So I can't remember what that wording actually is, but it's more
Right.
specific in the wording.
Good, thank you.
In the actual bylaw change, it's pretty specific what it says. And just to remember that also is National Council gets to decide whether that happens or not.
Right.
Okay. How's everybody feeling? Do you all feel like you have everything you need to know how to decide whether to vote yes, no, or make a motion to amend these proposed changes? Awesome. Is there anything else needed for the good of the order?
One person just said, no clear reason proposed to change these terms. So that's why they have,
Change which terms?
they don't say.
So, okay. I'm going to assume we mean the conforming amendments. And again, vote yes, vote no, propose a change. That's propose and make a motion to propose an amendment. That's, that's it. That's all, all we can do, we are just presenting these as proposed changes. It is up to National Convention to make the vote whether or not we make those changes. And remember that it does take a 2/3 majority to put these into effect. Okay. This is, you guys don't need to look at this, but in case you're curious, this was our example from Conversations with Daughters. This is Diocesan Assembly of Chicago. That's Episcopal, that's Roman Catholic, that's ECLA, which makes this the chaos that is in the Diocesan Assembly of Chicago when you refer to a bishop. Just saying. Or a diocese. Let's close with the motto of the order. Nancy, would you please lead us in the motto of the order? I would be very grateful for that. And I do want to say thank you all for being here. We appreciate all of your feedback, all of your questions. We appreciate your dedication to understanding these very complicated changes and to preparing yourselves for convention.
Monica, I do have one quick question. I very much appreciate you opening the Zoom for us today so that we got a heads up preview, if you would. I'm really interested in joining Judy for breakfast at Triennial.
Yes, thank you for reminding
So
us.
my question is,
there.
what room?
We don't have, it's to be announced. We don't have it yet. What room it's going to be. It's probably going to be where we're eating. I'll probably have a table set up or several tables that we can sit and eat and talk in the dining area.
Yeah, and so you might want to make it clear that it is a BYOB, bring your own breakfast.
Bring your own breakfast,
Yeah.
Thank
It will
you.
be on the schedule in the, is that, what day are you doing that, Judy?
I think Friday and Saturday morning.
Friday and Saturday morning, okay. I did clarify that the business meeting at which the bylaws will be considered will likely be Friday.
Oh, then it's going to be Thursday and Friday.
What?
So it'll be Thursday and Friday, whatever the 2 day, the day of the vote and the day before. So that would be Thursday and Friday.
So breakfast will be Thursday and Friday. So you have plenty of time to.
And if you need help writing a motion, we can help with that too.
Yes. Okay. Nancy, and thank you all for putting stuff in the chat. I will download this and try to get some responses if I haven't responded to things already.
Deep breath, everyone. And certainly we do appreciate very much all your concern, all your loving concern, and your dedication and your prayerful discernment. And we really do appreciate that you're not taking any of this lightly, as has the committee. We have done a lot of prayerful searching. So let us pray. For his sake, I am but one.
But
I am one.
I
cannot do everything, but I can do something. What I can do,
I ought to do. What I ought to do, by the grace of God, I will do. Lord, what will you have me do?